Hey there and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way.
3. Psychopaths Horror Stories. Hey everyone, before we begin tonight's video, I just want to say, some of these stories are going to stay with you long after you finish watching. These aren't your typical scary encounters. These are stories about people who came face to face with individuals who had absolutely nothing behind their eyes. No empathy, no remorse, just darkness. Tonight I'm sharing 3 disturbing true stories about psychopaths. And let me tell you, after reading these submissions, I couldn't sleep right for days. So turn off your lights, put on your headphones, and let's begin. Story 1. The Neighbor in Apartment 4B. This story comes from a guy named Marcus, who lived in a rundown apartment complex in Portland, Oregon, back in 2019. Marcus had just moved into this place because the rent was cheap, and he was trying to save money while working his first job out of college. The building was old, the kind with thin walls and flickering hallway lights that buzzed all night long. But it was temporary, or at least that's what he kept telling himself. The apartment next to his, 4B, had been empty for the first 2 weeks he lived there. He remembered feeling relieved about that. Fewer neighbors meant less noise, less drama. But that changed on Thursday evening when he came home from work and noticed the door to 4B was open just a crack. He could hear movement inside. Someone was home. Marcus didn't think much of it at first. New neighbor, whatever. He went into his own apartment, microwaved some leftovers, and started watching TV. But around 11 that night, he heard something that made his blood run cold. It was crying, but not normal crying. It was the sound of someone sobbing desperately, frantically, like they were absolutely terrified. And it was coming from 4B. Marcus turned down his TV and pressed his ear against the wall. The crying continued for maybe 30 seconds, and then it just stopped. Complete silence. He waited, listening, but there was nothing. No voices, no movement, just dead quiet. He tried to convince himself it was nothing. Maybe someone was watching a scary movie. Maybe it was coming from outside. But deep down, he knew what he heard, and it didn't sit right with him. The next morning, Marcus ran into his new neighbor in the hallway. The guy was probably in his late 30s, average height, thinning hair, wearing a button-up shirt and khakis like he was heading to an office job. He looked completely normal. Forgettable, even. "Hey," the guy said with a friendly smile. "Just moved in next door. I'm David." Marcus introduced himself, and they made small talk for a minute. David seemed polite, maybe a little too polite, but nothing that screamed red flag. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the memory of that crying from the night before. "Hey, this might sound weird, but I thought I heard someone crying in your apartment last night. Is everything okay?" David's smile didn't waver. He didn't even blink. "Oh, that," he said casually. "Yeah, I was watching a documentary about the Holocaust. Pretty heavy stuff. Sorry if it was too loud." It was a reasonable explanation. Marcus nodded and said it was no problem, and they both went their separate ways. But something about David's reaction bothered him. It was too smooth, too rehearsed. And his eyes. Marcus couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something off about the way David looked at him, like he was studying him. Over the next few days, Marcus started noticing strange things. He'd hear David moving around at odd hours, sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning. The guy seemed to keep the same schedule as him, leaving for work around the same time, coming home around the same time. But there were gaps. Sometimes David's car would be gone for hours in the middle of the night. Then, about a week after David moved in, he heard the crying again. This time it was louder, more desperate, and it was definitely coming from 4B. Marcus grabbed his phone, ready to call the police, but then he hesitated. What if it really was just a movie? What if he was overreacting? He didn't want to cause problems with a neighbor over nothing. But then he heard something else. A man's voice, calm and cold, saying, "Shh, shh, it's okay. Just breathe." And then the crying stopped. Just like before, sudden, abrupt, unnatural. Marcus's hands were shaking. He knew something was wrong. He had to do something. He decided he'd wait until morning and then talk to the building manager, maybe suggest they do a welfare check or something. But the next morning, when Marcus left for work, he saw David in the parking lot loading something into the trunk of his car. It was a large black duffel bag, the kind that looked heavy, and David was struggling to lift it. Their eyes met for a second, and David gave him that same friendly smile. "Morning, Marcus," he said, like nothing was unusual. Marcus barely managed to say good morning. He got in his car and drove to work, but he couldn't focus all day. His mind kept replaying that image. The duffel bag, the crying, David's hollow eyes. Something was deeply wrong, but he had no proof. The police had checked and found nothing. That night, Marcus barely slept. He kept thinking about the duffel bag, the crying, David's hollow eyes. Something was deeply wrong, but he had no proof. The police had checked and found nothing. Around 3 in the morning, Marcus heard footsteps in the hallway. He looked through his peephole and saw David leaving his apartment, carrying another duffel bag towards the stairs. The bag looked just as heavy as before. Marcus made a split-second decision. He grabbed his phone and quietly opened his door, following David from a distance. He watched as David went down to the basement level where the building's storage units were. He unlocked one of the units and disappeared inside with the bag. Marcus waited, hidden in the stairwell, his heart hammering in his chest. After a few minutes, David emerged, no longer carrying the bag. He locked the unit and headed back upstairs. Marcus waited until he was sure David was gone, then crept towards the storage unit. The lock was back on, but he could see the unit number. B14. The next morning, Marcus went to the building manager and said he thought there might be a leak or something in storage unit B14, that he'd heard water dripping down there. The manager was annoyed but agreed to check it out. Marcus insisted on coming along, saying that he wanted to make sure nothing was damaged since his unit was nearby. When they got down to B14, the manager unlocked it and pulled up the rolling door. The smell hit them immediately. It was faint, but unmistakable. Rot, decay, death. The manager gagged and stumbled back. Inside the unit, partially hidden under a tarp, were 2 black duffel bags. The police were called. Marcus was questioned for hours, and when they finally opened those bags, I'm not going to describe what they found in detail, but let's just say David had been busy for a long time before he moved into that building. David was arrested that same day. He didn't resist. He didn't show any emotion. When detectives asked him why he did it, he just shrugged and said, "I wanted to see what it felt like." Marcus moved out of that apartment the next week. He told me in his message that he still has nightmares about David's smile, about how normal he seemed. He said the scariest part wasn't the violence or the horror of what was in those bags. It was knowing that David had been watching him the whole time, deciding whether or not Marcus would be next. And he never would have known if he hadn't trusted his gut that something was wrong.
Story 2, The Hitchhiker. This next story comes from a woman named Sarah, and it takes place on a lonely stretch of highway in rural Montana back in 2017. Sarah was driving home after visiting her sister in Billings. It was late, probably close to midnight, and the highway was empty. Just her, the darkness, and the endless road stretching out under her headlights. She'd made this drive dozens of times, so she wasn't scared. If anything, she was tired and just wanted to get home. That's when she saw him. A man, standing on the side of the road, thumb out, the universal sign for hitchhiking. Sarah's first instinct was to keep driving. She'd heard enough horror stories about picking up strangers, especially out in the middle of nowhere. But as she got closer, she could see him more clearly in her headlights. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing jeans and a hoodie. He looked cold and exhausted, not threatening. And there was something about his posture, the way he was just standing there, that made her feel sorry for him. Against her better judgment, Sarah slowed down and pulled over. The guy jogged up to her passenger window, and she rolled it down just a crack. "Hey, thanks for stopping," he said, his voice friendly and grateful. "My car broke down about 5 miles back. I've been walking for over an hour. Any chance you could give me a lift to the next town?" Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, to drive away, but it was freezing outside and the next town was at least 30 miles away. If she left him out here, he'd be walking all night. "Just to the next town?" she asked. "That's it," he said with a smile. "I promise I'm not a serial killer or anything." It was meant to be a joke, but something about the way he said it made Sarah's stomach tighten. Still, she unlocked the door. "Okay, get in." The guy climbed into the passenger seat, bringing a wave of cold air with him. "Thank you so much," he said, buckling his seatbelt. "I'm Josh, by the way." "Sarah," she replied, pulling back onto the highway. For the first few miles, Josh was quiet. He just stared out the window, watching the darkness fly by. Sarah kept the radio on low, some country station playing softly in the background. She tried to focus on the road, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Josh wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't moving strangely or saying anything weird, but there was this presence about him, like the air in the car had gotten heavier the moment he got in. "So what happened to your car?" Sarah asked, trying to fill the silence. Josh turned to look at her, and for the first time she could see his face clearly in the glow of the dashboard lights. He had pale skin, dark eyes, and a smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. "Oh, just overheated," he said. "I should have checked the coolant before I left. Stupid mistake." "That sucks," Sarah said. "Do you have someone you can call when we get to town?" "Yeah, I'll figure something out." Josh then leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. "Mind if I rest for a bit? I'm exhausted." "Go ahead," Sarah said, relieved that he wasn't going to talk anymore. But Josh didn't rest. Sarah could see his reflection in the window, and his eyes were still open, staring at her. He wasn't blinking, just watching her with this cold, calculating look that made her skin crawl. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She told herself she was being paranoid. He was probably just tired and zoning out. But then Josh spoke again, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. "You ever think about how easy it would be?" "What?" "How easy it would be to just disappear someone. Out here, in the middle of nowhere. No witnesses, no cameras. Just gone." Sarah's blood turned to ice. That's a weird thing to say. Josh chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Is it? I think about it a lot. How fragile everything is. How one decision, one moment, can change everything." Sarah didn't respond. She was too busy calculating how far she was from the next town, how fast she could pull over and kick him out, whether her phone had service out here. "Don't worry," Josh said, sitting up straight now. "I'm just messing with you. People always get freaked out when you talk about dark stuff. It's funny." "Yeah, hilarious," Sarah muttered, her voice barely steady. The next few minutes felt like hours.
Josh didn't say anything else, but Sarah could feel him watching her. She kept her eyes on the road, her mind racing through every possible scenario. Finally, she saw a glow in the distance. Lights. The next town. "Looks like we're almost there," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice casual. "Yeah," Josh said. "Hey, actually, do you think you could drop me off at the gas station on the edge of town? I don't want to make you go out of your way." "Sure," Sarah said quickly. Anything to get him out of her car faster. She pulled into the gas station, which was open, but empty except for a bored-looking clerk inside. Josh unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. But before he got out, he turned to Sarah one last time. "Thanks for the ride. You're a trusting person, Sarah. That's a good quality, but you should be more careful. Not everyone is as nice as me." And then he smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah's voice caught in her throat. She managed to nod, and Josh got out, closing the door behind him. She watched as he walked towards the gas station, his hands in his pockets, looking completely calm. Sarah drove away as fast as she could without speeding. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. When she got home, she locked every door and window in her house. The next morning, Sarah called the police and reported the encounter. She gave them Josh's description and told them everything he said. The officer on the phone took notes, but didn't seem overly concerned. "Sounds like the guy was just trying to scare you. Some people have a twisted sense of humor." But then, about a week later, Sarah got a call from a detective. They'd found a body about 10 miles from where Sarah had picked Josh up. A young woman, early 20s, had been reported missing 3 days before Sarah's encounter. Her body was found in a ditch, partially buried. The detective wanted to know if Sarah could come in and look at some photos, see if she could identify Josh from a lineup of suspects. Sarah agreed, her stomach churning. When she got to the station, the detective showed her several photos. And there, in the middle of the second row, was Josh. Same face. Same cold eyes. "That's him," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. The detective nodded grimly. "His real name is Nathan Holt. He's been on our radar for years. We've suspected him in several disappearances across 3 states, but we've never had enough evidence to arrest him." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "We're working on it," the detective said. "But Sarah, you're lucky. Whatever made you drop him off when you did, it probably saved your life. He usually doesn't let his victims go." Sarah went home that day and couldn't stop shaking. She kept replaying the drive in her head. Josh's words, his smile. She thought about how close she had come to being just another name on a missing persons list. To this day, Sarah doesn't pick up hitchhikers. She doesn't care how cold it is or how desperate someone looks, because she knows now that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like a guy named Josh who just needs a ride.
Story 3. The Coworker. This last story is probably the most disturbing one, and it comes from a guy named Alex, who worked at a tech startup in Austin, Texas in 2020. Alex had been working at this company for about 6 months when they hired a new software engineer named Eric. Eric was in his early 30s, quiet, kept to himself mostly. He was good at his job, always on time, never caused any problems. The kind of employee every manager loves. Alex's desk was right next to Eric's, so they ended up talking occasionally. Eric was polite, but distant. He didn't join in on office banter, didn't go to happy hours, didn't seem interested in making friends. But again, nothing about that screamed red flag. Some people are just introverted. But then, about a month after Eric started, something strange happened. Alex had stayed late one night to finish a project. Most of the office had cleared out by 7, and by 9, Alex thought he was completely alone. He was just packing up his stuff when he heard a noise coming from the other side of the floor. It sounded like typing. Slow, deliberate typing. Alex walked over and saw Eric still at his desk, illuminated by the glow of his monitor. But he wasn't working on code or company projects. He was on some kind of website that Alex didn't recognize. It looked like a forum with walls of text and small profile pictures. "Hey, Eric," Alex said, trying not to startle him. "Didn't realize you were still here." Eric closed his laptop so fast it made a loud snap. He turned to Alex with a blank expression. "Just finishing up some work," he said flatly. "Cool," Alex said, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. "I'm heading out. See you tomorrow." Eric didn't respond. He just stared at Alex until Alex turned and walked away. That night, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He tried to remember what he'd seen on Eric's screen, but it had only been a glimpse. Still, the way Eric had reacted, the way he'd slammed a laptop shut, it felt wrong. The next day, Alex tried to act normal around Eric, but he started paying more attention to him. He noticed that Eric would often lock his computer screen when someone walked by. He noticed that Eric never talked about his personal life, never mentioned family or friends or hobbies. He was a blank slate. Then one afternoon, Alex overheard Eric on a phone call in the break room. He didn't realize anyone was nearby. Alex was just grabbing a coffee from the machine when he heard Eric's voice, low and cold. "I told you I'm handling it. She doesn't suspect anything. I've been careful." There was a pause, then Eric continued. "No, I don't think we need to move that quickly. I want to enjoy this." Alex froze. The way Eric said, "enjoy this," made his blood run cold. There was something predatory in his tone, something wrong. Eric hung up the phone and walked out of the break room, brushing past Alex without saying a word. Alex tried to convince himself he was reading too much into it. Maybe Eric was talking about a business deal or a surprise party or something completely innocent. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Eric was talking about something much darker. Over the next few weeks, Alex did something he's not proud of. He started snooping. When Eric would step away from his desk, Alex would glance at his screen trying to see what he was working on. Most of the time it was normal work stuff, but once Alex saw Eric on that same forum again. This time Alex managed to catch a few words before he noticed him and closed the screen. The words he saw made him feel sick. Hunting, disposal, next target. Alex didn't sleep that night. The next morning he made an anonymous tip to the police saying he thought a coworker might be involved in something dangerous. He gave them Eric's name and the name of the company. A few days later, 2 detectives showed up at the office and asked to speak with Eric. Alex watched from across the floor as they led Eric into a conference room. Eric looked calm, almost bored, as he followed them. The detectives questioned him for over an hour. When they finally left, Eric returned to his desk like nothing had happened. But as he sat down, he turned to Alex and gave him a long, cold stare. "Interesting morning," Eric said quietly. "Someone told the police I'm dangerous. Can you imagine that?" Alex's heart pounded. "That's crazy," he managed to say. "Yeah, crazy," Eric said, still staring at him. That afternoon, Alex went to HR and asked to be moved to a different part of the office. He made up an excuse about needing to collaborate more closely with another team. They approved the move, and by the end of the week, Alex was on a different floor, far away from Eric. But the story doesn't end there. About 2 months later, Alex was scrolling through the news on his phone when he saw a headline that made him stop breathing. "Local man arrested in connection with multiple disappearances." There was a photo. It was Eric. According to the article, police had finally gathered enough evidence to arrest Eric for suspected involvement in the disappearances of at least 4 women over the past 3 years. They'd found disturbing evidence on his personal computer, including detailed logs of his activities and communications on dark web forums where he discussed his crimes with like-minded individuals. Alex read the article in stunned silence. The women Eric had targeted were all in their 20s, all lived alone, all had been stalked for weeks before they vanished. Eric had planned everything meticulously. He'd been living a completely normal life on the surface, going to work, paying his bills, while secretly hunting people in his free time. The police spokesperson said that an anonymous tip had initially put Eric on their radar, which had led to further investigation. Alex realized that was his tip. He'd helped stop Eric even if he hadn't fully understood what he was stopping at the time. But here's the part that still haunts Alex to this day. One of the detectives called him a few weeks after the arrest to ask him some follow-up questions. During that conversation, the detective mentioned something chilling. We found a list on Eric's computer. It was titled Future Projects. Your name was on that list, Alex. You were number 7. Alex felt like the world had dropped out from under him. What? Eric had been watching you, the detective explained. He knew where you lived, what route you took to work, what time you usually left the office. He was planning to make a move on you within the next few months. Alex could barely process it. He'd been sitting next to a predator, working alongside him every day, completely unaware that he was being hunted. If you hadn't reported him when you did, things might have turned out very differently, the detective continued. Alex quit his job the next month. He couldn't stand being in that building anymore, couldn't stand walking past Eric's empty desk and thinking about what could have happened. He moved to a different city, started over. But he still thinks about Eric sometimes, about how normal he seemed, how he could smile and make small talk while planning to murder people, and how there was nothing behind his eyes, no humanity, just a cold, calculating emptiness. Alex told me he learned something important from that experience. He learned that evil doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like your coworker, the guy who sits next to you every day who seems quiet and harmless. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and becoming a victim is trusting your gut when something feels wrong. So those were 3 psychopath horror stories. I don't know about you, but these stories really got under my skin. The scariest part isn't the violence or the gore. It's the realization that these people walk among us, looking completely normal, hiding in plain sight. Marcus, Sarah, and Alex all survived their encounters, but they all say the same thing. They still look over their shoulders. They still have nightmares. Because once you've looked into the eyes of someone with nothing behind them, you never really forget it. If you have your own disturbing story about an encounter with someone who seemed off, someone who gave you that gut feeling that something was wrong, feel free to share it in the comments below. And remember, always trust your instincts. They might just save your life. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe out there.